Finally, the phrase, "it's not what you think," is one that is often used to minimize the severity of a situation or to justify behavior that might otherwise seem suspicious or inappropriate. This phrase typically comes into play when the accused individual is confronted with evidence or signs that suggest something is amiss. Instead of acknowledging the issue, they seek to downplay it or reframe the situation in a way that casts doubt on the interpretation of events. It is an attempt to invalidate the partner's perception of reality and shift the focus away from the behavior being questioned. "It's not what you think" is a phrase that operates on the assumption that the accuser is misunderstanding the situation or that they are reading too much into something that is entirely innocent. It serves as a deflection, a way of controlling the narrative in a manner that allows the person to avoid facing the truth. In some cases, the phrase may be used even when the person knows that their actions are indeed wrong, as they attempt to justify or rationalize their behavior to both themselves and their partner. The phrase can indicate an unwillingness to take responsibility for one's actions and often reveals an attempt to control the perception of the situation. Instead of being forthcoming or open, the speaker opts to cast doubt on the concerns of their partner, creating a sense of confusion that serves to maintain the status quo. When used in the context of infidelity, "it's not what you think" can be a powerful tool in maintaining secrecy, while simultaneously manipulating the emotions of the person who is questioning the relationship. In conclusion, the phrases discussed above, "I've just been busy lately," "you are just being paranoid," "we're just friends," "I don't owe you an explanation," and "it's not what you think," are not merely words. They are indicative of deeper psychological mechanisms at work. Each phrase reflects a defense against confrontation, a desire to maintain control, and an attempt to avoid responsibility. When used in the context of infidelity, these phrases signal a disconnect between the emotional or physical reality of the relationship and the attempt to preserve a false narrative. Recognizing these signs is crucial for understanding the dynamics of betrayal and the psychological complexities that accompany it. By paying attention to the subtle messages embedded in everyday language, one can gain insight into the underlying truths that may be hidden beneath the surface of a relationship. Key phrases like "I've just been busy lately" or "you are just being paranoid" often reflect an individual's emotional withdrawal or an attempt to discredit concerns. These phrases serve as deflections, avoiding confrontation and emotional accountability, which can indicate underlying issues such as infidelity. Phrases such as "we're just friends," "I don't owe you an explanation," and "it's not what you think" often function as tools to control the narrative and protect the individual from the truth. They manipulate the perception of the relationship, deflecting suspicion and minimizing responsibility while fostering confusion and distrust. When we examine the intricate layers of human relationships, emotional distance and deflection are among the most powerful and subtle mechanisms people use to protect themselves from confrontation, guilt, or emotional vulnerability. These mechanisms are not always easy to detect, especially when they are camouflaged behind seemingly benign phrases like "I've just been busy lately," or "you are just being paranoid." At first glance, these expressions may seem innocuous, even understandable, but upon closer inspection, they often reveal deeper psychological undercurrents that speak to an individual's attempt to withdraw, shield themselves, or obscure the truth of their actions. In the context of infidelity, these phrases become a way to distance oneself emotionally and evade responsibility, even as the relationship itself begins to fray under the weight of unspoken truths. When someone repeatedly uses the phrase, "I've just been busy lately," it may initially appear to be a reasonable explanation for why they are unavailable or emotionally distant. Life, after all, does get hectic. Work, social commitments, personal projects, and the demands of daily living can easily create moments of disconnection. However, the key to understanding why this phrase is so often associated with emotional withdrawal is the context in which it is used. When someone begins to utter this phrase frequently, it often signals that something more profound is happening beneath the surface. In many cases, it is not the sheer busyness of life that is the issue, but the avoidance of intimacy, transparency, or accountability. In relationships, emotional connection is built on the foundation of shared experiences, mutual understanding, and openness. Couples rely on each other to provide both support and engagement, whether through conversation, shared activities, or even quiet companionship. When one partner begins to withdraw from these moments of connection, the "I've just been busy lately" excuse often serves as a way to deflect the other person's concerns and avoid engaging in a difficult conversation. This phrase allows the individual to avoid revealing their true emotional state, the possibility of another person's involvement, or the deeper reasons for their detachment. Moreover, this phrase can signal a gradual breakdown in communication. If it is used repeatedly over a period of time, it suggests that the individual is no longer prioritizing the relationship in the way they once did. The busyness may be real, but the repeated nature of the excuse creates an emotional chasm between the partners. The person using this phrase is deflecting from the underlying issue, which could range from a growing dissatisfaction with the relationship to the desire for space to entertain an extramarital affair. The phrase becomes a shield, a way to maintain an illusion of normalcy without having to address the uncomfortable reality of a changing emotional landscape. The impact of such repeated deflections can be profound on the partner, who is left wondering whether their concerns are valid or merely the product of their imagination. The accusation of being paranoid is another phrase commonly used to deflect suspicion, and it has the added effect of invalidating the feelings of the person who is questioning the relationship. When one partner expresses discomfort or suspicion, and the other responds with a dismissive "you are just being paranoid," the underlying message is clear. The concerns are unfounded, and the person raising them is overreacting. This deflection tactic is a common response when someone is attempting to avoid accountability for their actions, particularly when those actions may be damaging to the relationship. At the heart of this response is a desire to maintain control of the narrative. Rather than confronting the issue head-on, the person who is being questioned uses the paranoia accusation as a way to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the concern. By labeling the partner as irrational or overly suspicious, they shift the burden of responsibility away from their own behavior and onto the emotional state of the person who is expressing dissatisfaction. This technique of deflection not only avoids addressing the real issue, whether it's infidelity, emotional neglect, or another form of betrayal, but also creates an atmosphere of uncertainty in which the concerned partner begins to question their own instincts and perceptions. Deflection, in this case, is not simply a way of avoiding a difficult conversation. It is a psychological manipulation that undermines the validity of the other person's feelings. It plants a seed of doubt in their mind, making them wonder whether their emotions are indeed paranoid or grounded in reality. This can lead to a toxic dynamic in which one partner feels as though they are walking on eggshells, constantly questioning whether their suspicions are legitimate or whether they are simply overreacting. The longer this dynamic persists, the more difficult it becomes to have open and honest conversations about the state of the relationship, as one partner has effectively silenced the other's concerns with a clever deflection. This cycle of emotional distance and deflection can create a growing divide between partners, one that is difficult to bridge once it has taken root. It often leads to a sense of isolation, where one person feels as though they are left in the dark, unable to access the truth about the state of the relationship. The more frequently these deflections are employed, the more difficult it becomes for the concerned partner to trust their own perceptions, ultimately leading to a breakdown in the relationship's foundation of trust and emotional connection. Another phrase that frequently appears in situations where emotional distance and deflection are at play is, "we're just friends." This phrase often emerges when one partner begins to grow suspicious of the other's interactions with someone outside the relationship. The phrase itself, when used defensively, seeks to minimize the significance of the relationship in question, often as a means of reassuring the partner who is raising concerns. However, beneath this reassurance lies an undercurrent of defensiveness and avoidance. The statement, "we're just friends," may sound innocent enough on the surface, but in many cases, it is an attempt to downplay the emotional significance of an external relationship that may have already crossed the boundaries of friendship. The defensiveness inherent in this phrase suggests that the person using it is attempting to protect themselves from exposure. They may have developed a deeper emotional or physical connection with someone outside the relationship, but instead of acknowledging the complexity of the situation, they seek to minimize it with a blanket statement. The phrase becomes a form of deflection, an attempt to reassure the partner that there is no cause for concern. Yet the very need to repeatedly assert that "we're just friends" often highlights the growing emotional distance between the two individuals in the relationship. The need to over-clarify the nature of the relationship with an outside person speaks to an internal conflict, one in which the speaker is trying to conceal something from their partner while also downplaying the severity of the situation. This deflection tactic is particularly insidious because it relies on the assumption that the concerned partner will take the phrase at face value and cease questioning the nature of the external relationship. It creates a sense of false reassurance, one that allows the person to continue with their actions without feeling the weight of their partner's suspicions. Over time, the repeated use of "we're just friends" can erode trust, particularly if the concerned partner begins to notice behavioral inconsistencies or emotional distance that does not align with the claim of friendship. The phrase becomes less a statement of fact and more a tool used to avoid uncomfortable truths about infidelity or emotional neglect. The repeated use of deflection phrases like, "I've just been busy lately," "You are just being paranoid," and "we're just friends," can have a cumulative effect on the relationship. These phrases not only distance the individuals emotionally, but also prevent meaningful communication from taking place. The partner who is being deflected feels increasingly isolated, questioning both the authenticity of the relationship and the sincerity of their partner's words. Each phrase used to deflect responsibility or avoid confrontation deepens the emotional divide, creating an environment in which trust is slowly eroded and vulnerability becomes increasingly difficult. The cumulative impact of emotional distance and deflection can result in the breakdown of intimacy within the relationship. Intimacy is not just about physical closeness, it is about emotional transparency, the willingness to share one's fears, desires, and vulnerabilities with another person. When emotional distance is allowed to grow unchecked, intimacy becomes replaced with avoidance, and communication becomes reduced to superficial exchanges that lack depth or authenticity. The partner who is left on the receiving end of deflection becomes increasingly aware that something is wrong, even if they cannot quite put their finger on what it is. This creates a sense of anxiety and uncertainty, as the relationship that once felt secure and transparent begins to feel fractured and opaque. In many ways, emotional distance and deflection are forms of self-preservation. The individual who engages in these tactics may not consciously intend to harm the relationship, but rather seeks to protect themselves from exposure, vulnerability, or the consequences of their actions. Whether it is an affair, an emotional withdrawal, or some other form of betrayal. These deflection strategies allow the individual to avoid confronting the discomfort or guilt that comes with owning up to their behavior. However, in the long term, these strategies only serve to deepen the rift between the two partners, leading to a breakdown in trust, emotional intimacy, and ultimately the relationship itself. The emotional consequences of using deflection tactics are not limited to the partner who is on the receiving end of the manipulation. The individual who is distancing themselves and using deflection may also experience a sense of guilt, confusion, and internal conflict. While these emotions may be suppressed in the short term, the longer the deflection tactics are employed, the greater the emotional toll on the individual. They may find themselves trapped in a cycle of dishonesty, unable to break free from the pattern of avoidance and evasion that they have created. In many cases, this cycle only deepens the emotional isolation, leaving both partners feeling disconnected and adrift in the relationship. The use of emotional distance and deflection in relationships can serve as an early warning sign of deeper issues at play. While these tactics may provide temporary relief from the discomfort of facing difficult truths, they ultimately prevent the relationship from progressing in a healthy and honest manner. The ability to confront uncomfortable issues directly and with empathy is essential for maintaining a relationship that is both emotionally connected and resilient in the face of challenges. Without this foundation of honesty and communication, the emotional distance created by deflection becomes a permanent barrier that stifles growth and understanding, leaving the relationship in a fragile and precarious state. In human relationships, particularly those that are emotionally intimate, the dynamics of power and influence can play a critical role in determining the course of the relationship. One of the most subtle yet effective ways in which people manage or manipulate relationships is through the control of perception. In many instances, individuals who are engaged in behaviors such as infidelity, dishonesty, or emotional neglect resort to manipulation tactics in order to maintain a sense of control over how they are viewed and how their actions are understood. The phrases people use to deflect suspicion or shift blame are often grounded in an underlying strategy. They seek to reshape the way their partner perceives the situation and, in some cases, the very reality of what is happening in the relationship. This manipulation of perception can manifest in a variety of ways, but it often begins with the use of specific phrases designed to invalidate the other person's perceptions, cast doubt on their emotional responses, and protect the manipulator from exposure. One of the most common phrases used in these situations is the reassuring yet dismissive, "We're just friends." On the surface, this might seem like a simple declaration, an innocuous statement meant to allay concerns about the nature of a relationship outside the couple. However, when used in the context of suspicious behavior or a growing emotional detachment, it quickly becomes clear that this phrase is not as straightforward as it first appears. Instead, it becomes a tool for manipulating perception, specifically the perception of what constitutes acceptable behavior within the confines of the relationship. When someone is engaging in emotional or physical infidelity, they may try to downplay the significance of their relationship with the third party by repeatedly stating that "we're just friends." This statement is a form of perception control, one that seeks to reassure the partner who is questioning the relationship, even as the reality of the situation becomes more complex. By labeling the connection as merely platonic, the individual deflects the concern and attempts to normalize behavior that may, in fact, be crossing the boundaries of the relationship. This tactic is often used to protect the manipulator from having to confront the guilt or discomfort that might arise from their actions. Instead of acknowledging the emotional or physical intimacy that may exist between themselves and the other person, they reduce it to the level of a harmless friendship, even if it involves emotional intimacy or a bond that surpasses the superficial nature of a typical friendship. The power of this phrase lies in its simplicity and in the way it shifts the narrative. The accused individual may repeat the phrase with such conviction that it creates an emotional environment in which the partner starts to doubt their own perceptions. If the phrase is used repeatedly, particularly when the partner's suspicions seem unfounded, the manipulator is not just providing a defense, they are actively attempting to control the perception of the situation. The implication is that the partner who is concerned is overreacting, imagining a problem where none exists. Over time, this can lead the concerned individual to question their own judgment, potentially sowing seeds of self-doubt. By framing the relationship as nothing more than a harmless friendship, the manipulator ensures that their actions remain largely unchallenged, and they maintain the upper hand in controlling how the relationship is perceived. Another phrase frequently used in these dynamics is, "I don't owe you an explanation." This phrase is a powerful tool of manipulation because it immediately closes down the possibility for meaningful dialogue. When someone says they don't owe the other person an explanation, they are not just avoiding the question at hand, they are attempting to control the emotional landscape of the relationship. This phrase signals that the manipulator is not interested in engaging with their partner's concerns or addressing the underlying issues that may be causing distress in the relationship. It places the burden of accountability on the partner who is asking the questions, making them feel as though they have no right to inquire further or seek clarity about behaviors that may be troubling. The phrase, "I don't owe you an explanation," is particularly effective because it combines a sense of superiority with a deliberate shutdown of communication. It is a way of asserting power in the relationship by refusing to provide transparency. In a healthy relationship, mutual respect and open communication are the cornerstones of trust and understanding. When one partner uses this phrase, they effectively disrupt the foundation of the relationship by making it clear that they are not accountable to the other person. This refusal to explain their actions or motivations creates an emotional distance between the individuals, one that makes it difficult for the concerned partner to understand the reasoning behind certain behaviors. The manipulator does not want to be questioned, does not want to be held accountable, and by using this phrase, they can avoid addressing any potential wrongdoing. This phrase also works by creating confusion and frustration in the partner who is seeking answers. The individual on the receiving end of this manipulation is left in a state of uncertainty, wondering why they are being denied clarity and transparency. This emotional ambiguity can lead to a sense of helplessness, as the manipulator effectively controls the narrative by refusing to engage. Over time, the partner may begin to feel that their concerns are invalid, or that they have no right to ask questions at all. This dynamic is particularly harmful because it stifles communication and prevents the relationship from growing in a healthy, honest direction. When someone is repeatedly told they don't deserve an explanation, they may start to internalize the belief that their emotions and concerns are not valid, which weakens their sense of self-worth and erodes the trust between partners. The phrase, "it's not what you think," is another manipulation tactic that is frequently used to alter the perception of a situation and protect the manipulator from exposure. When someone is confronted with evidence or suspicion of infidelity or other forms of betrayal, this phrase is often used as a way to downplay the situation and reassure the other person that their interpretation is incorrect. The phrase itself suggests that the partner is misunderstanding the circumstances and that their feelings of doubt are based on an inaccurate assessment of the situation. By saying, "it's not what you think," the manipulator is not only minimizing the severity of the situation, but they are also attempting to redirect the partner's attention away from their own behavior and onto the emotional state of the person raising concerns. The power of this phrase lies in its ability to create a false sense of clarity. The manipulator implies that they have a more accurate understanding of the situation than the person who is questioning them, which can create confusion and self-doubt. The more often this phrase is used, the more the partner may begin to question their own perceptions, feelings, and intuition. This strategy works because it plays on the emotions of insecurity and doubt. The accused individual is subtly suggesting that their partner's suspicions are not based on fact, but on a misinterpretation, which leaves the concerned individual in a state of confusion and uncertainty. The implication is that the partner's emotional reaction is exaggerated or unfounded, and that they should trust the manipulator's version of events instead. In relationships, when one partner consistently uses phrases like, "we're just friends," "I don't owe you an explanation," and "it's not what you think," the effect can be deeply destabilizing. These phrases work together to control the emotional landscape of the relationship and manipulate how each person perceives the situation. The person who is being manipulated is left questioning their own thoughts, feelings, and interpretations, while the manipulator gains control over the narrative. Over time, this dynamic can erode the foundation of trust and intimacy, leaving the partner who is being manipulated feeling isolated and unsure of their own perceptions. The manipulation of perception goes beyond just controlling the way a partner interprets specific events. It also extends to how the manipulator seeks to control their partner's emotional state. By using these phrases, the manipulator creates a psychological environment in which the partner is constantly on edge, unsure of whether their feelings are valid or whether they are simply being overly sensitive or paranoid. This constant self-doubt serves the manipulator's agenda because it diverts attention away from their own actions and onto the insecurities of the other person. The manipulator's behavior may be indefensible, but by altering the partner's perception of reality, they create a smokescreen that obscures the truth and allows them to maintain control of the relationship. In many cases, the manipulation of perception is a means of maintaining power within the relationship. The individual who engages in this behavior is seeking to avoid the consequences of their actions, whether it be infidelity, dishonesty, or emotional neglect, be preventing their partner from understanding the true nature of what is happening. The use of deflection tactics such as, "we're just friends," "I don't owe you an explanation," and "it's not what you think" creates a false reality, one in which the manipulator can continue their behavior without facing the discomfort of accountability. By controlling how the relationship is perceived, they maintain their ability to engage in actions that might otherwise be questioned or condemned. This form of manipulation is insidious because it doesn't just rely on dishonesty about specific events, it relies on shaping the broader narrative of the relationship itself. It involves convincing the partner that their concerns are not justified, that their suspicions are irrational, and that their emotional reactions are disproportionate. It works by gradually wearing down the partner's sense of trust in their own judgment and creating an emotional environment where the manipulator can act with impunity. Over time, this can create a toxic cycle in which the concerned partner feels increasingly powerless, and the manipulator continues to evade responsibility. In conclusion, the phrase is used to manipulate and control perception. "We're just friends," "I don't owe you an explanation," and "it's not what you think" are more than just convenient excuses. They are deliberate tools for maintaining control over how the relationship is understood and how the behaviors within it are interpreted. These phrases are employed not merely to deny or deflect, but to actively manipulate the emotional and psychological dynamics of the relationship. They create confusion, sow doubt, and erode trust, leaving the partner who is being manipulated in a constant state of uncertainty. Through these tactics, the manipulator is able to protect their own interests and avoid exposure, all while reshaping the perception of reality in a way that serves their agenda.